true stories
that make us say,
wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
She went out there and I was just super distraught because it just didn't seem right. And I don't see her. And I just started screaming.
I identified myself and gave her some verbal commands. And when she turned and faced me, I saw the hatchet. I realized that's not a knife, that's a hatchet. And she began to walk towards me.
But the nightmares were all the same. They consisted around me being trapped inside of something.
Hi, I'm Rob Vischer. This is a tough episode for me to write. I grew up praying for the Lord's protection on everything. I over-prayed out of a fear that if I didn't pray for protection, I would get in a car crash or that tragedy would strike unexpectedly. I even listened to Christian music in the car for the same reason, believing that if I listened to Christian music, it would save me from getting speeding tickets or getting in fatal car wrecks. My prayers had less to do with my devotion to God and more to do with my devotion to a pain-free life. And now that I'm a dad, I still don't like the idea of pain or tragedy, but I would way rather something painful or tragic happen to me rather than my kids. That's why sitting with this first story is so hard.
My name is Gary Malashevsky, and this is my wife, Mary.
Hi.
And this is our story. Back then, I was a young driver, and I was coming around a 20-mile-an-hour curve, and I was probably going 40, 45. I know I was speeding, and I was breaking the law. And I came around, and I see a little girl in the road riding her bike, and I had to go completely into the other lane, otherwise I would have hit her. And as I passed by her, I stopped my UPS vehicle and I went back and I started talking to her and I said, "Little girl, I got a daughter the same age as you." And I said, "If I would have hit you, I would have killed you." And had there been a car coming the other direction, it would have been a bad accident and stuff. And so I asked her where she lived, and she said that she lived up on the hill. And so I went and I drove up on the hill and I started telling the dad about how I almost hit his little girl. And then he started bawling and I started bawling. And then I'm telling him what happened. And then he goes, "Wait, so nothing happened?" I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, then why are we crying?" I said, "I don't know." For the next 2 weeks, I struggled sleeping. And I just pondered the whole thing. What in the world? Why did I go up there? What was I searching for? And I realized that I was searching for his forgiveness because I knew I was doing something I shouldn't have done in speeding on that road. It was really a tough thing for me to get past. I did sleep real well.
Then in November, later on that year, we went to a family life marriage conference. And the whole weekend, Rick and Judy Taylor were the speakers, and they had written a book 20 years prior about what they were speaking about. And what they were speaking about was the death of their son. And it was just so hard for me to hear because I'd never experienced anybody really close to me, let alone a child die. And so anyways, at the end of the weekend, we each bought a book. And I bought one on marriage enrichment, and Gary bought the book they had written.
She kept putting it back down.
Yeah,
and I'm like, "What are you doing?"
I kept leaving it before we go pay. And he's like, "We need that book." He goes, "One of these days, you're going to have to deal with death." And I go, "Yeah, this is the death of a child." So
I remember when I was sitting at the, listening to them talk about the death of their child, I was getting just absolutely, my heart was just, I was really, really upset. And I was like, how can they talk about the death of their son and not have any emotion about it? And it was really, really hard on me because I'm like, you lost your child. And then later on, I thought, wait a second, you know what? They told this story so many times, and it was like 20 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I was too hard on him and
Yeah.
stuff, you know.
So, anyways, they wrote the book called When Life is Changed Forever. We brought the book home. I put it on the bookshelf that month. You know, it was close to Christmas. So we were getting ready for Christmas. We, the weekend before, we had actually dressed up and took our kids to see the Nutcracker on Sunday night to the evening show. We wanted to all dress up and it was really fun. And then we had also went to Chinese food, which was our family's favorite dinner and stuff. And then on Monday, me and a bunch of homeschool moms made cookies together. And the kids, I felt like it was a ministry I had with the kids. And what we do is we'd package up cookies and we'd give them to all the service people. We'd give them to the mailman, to the paper boy back then when there were paper, people delivering the paper to your door and they're teenagers, and the garbage man, their cycle man, just everybody who did service for us. And so that night I went to a homeschooling meeting and had talked to a gentleman there by the name of Mike, who was very instrumental the next day. So anyways, Tuesday morning, Gary went off to work, and I had got up and we were getting ready to, do our day, and the kids were excited about giving the cookies out, and Hannah wanted to take cookies out. And so we heard the people coming down the road, and she wanted to take the cookies out. So she went out there, and I was just super distraught because it just didn't seem right. And next thing I know, I'm just like, he's going and I don't see her. And I just started screaming. And I just kept screaming, and I ran out there. And I was like, she's gone, I ran back in and I got the phone and I called 911, and they wanted me to try to resuscitate her. But I'm like, there's nothing I can do, And then somehow the police showed that the driver ended up stopping. I don't know exactly everything that happened because it was just such a traumatic experience. And anyways, I ended up in the house, and a police officer was sitting with me on the couch waiting for Gary to come home. This police officer says, I have a little girl, and about your daughter's age. And he goes, I'm so sorry. And we started talking somehow, and I found out he homeschooled. And anyways, he was the guy I talked to the night before. And I said, I remember you. You let me into the library last night to return some books. Do you remember that? And he goes, yes. And I go, can you please pray for me? Because I know you're a Christian. And so anyways, he did.
So when I was driving my UPS truck, what had happened was my bosses had sent me a text that I needed to go down and meet a boss down at the McDonald's. And I'm like, what's going on? I said, why do I got to go down there? Because I'm a, UPSer, and I know what happens if you got to meet up with a boss. It ain't good. And so then they said, you're not in trouble, Gary. Everything's fine. So then all of a sudden I got worried, and I called my wife and I said, is everything okay? And she says, Hannah's dead. And I just absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs. I probably blew her ears out because I couldn't believe what she had just said. And so then I cleaned my face up because I started crying. And I said, okay, what happened? She goes, Hannah's dead. And I absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs again. And then I cleaned my face up, and I'm driving down in my UPS truck, which I should not have been doing. And I can't hardly see driving. And then I asked, tell me what happened. And she said, Hannah dead. And I just screamed again. And then I said, I have to get off the phone. And I got off the phone. And I could hardly even see driving down Pumpkin Ridge, and because it's a kind of a windy road and stuff. And then I met up with my boss, and he looks at me and he goes, you know what happened, don't you? And I was like, yeah. And I already cried so hard that I was able to just kind of keep it under control a little bit. He drove me home, which took an hour, and I pondered the whole entire situation of what God had been taking me through and preparing me for this moment. And so I got to the house, and then I said, I need to see the driver of the truck. And so they said, well, it's going to take a few minutes. And so then they bring me around the back, and the driver's standing there, and there's like 5 cops around him. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. I don't know why there's 5 cops. Because I wasn't thinking anything bad, but I guess, probably sometimes people, they don't react in a good way. And so I went up to him, and I gave him a hug, and I told him I forgave him, because I knew that that's what God had prepared me for that day. And my brother had hate in his heart and was looking at me, and he wanted to kill the guy. And he said, hate left his heart. And he said, how can I hate somebody where my own brother doesn't hate him? Yeah. And so it was a very, very difficult day.
I didn't know how the driver ended up at her memorial service, but we had a memorial service. So anyways, he asked if the driver was there, and he called him forward, and then Gary gave him a hug in the front of the church and stuff, which was very, emotional and everything. Also, I talked to Judy Taylor, the lady who, her husband wrote the book, When Life Has Changed Forever. And I talked to her on what would have been Hannah's 8th birthday. And it was very, she understood. She knew my position of being the one on watch that day, and to have your child die and to die unexpectedly is so, I can't even explain it. It's, you just don't want to have to go through it.
I took after our daughter had been killed, I don't know if it was the next day or whatever, but I took her in the kitchen, and I hugged my wife, and I said, honey, God tells us that we all have
our days are numbered.
Our days are numbered, and we don't know when those days are. And I was hugging her, and I said, if she was in this house right now and this was her day, there's nothing you could have done. And God would have taken her. It happens all the time where somebody unbelievably dies for some reason. And my goal isn't that my wife would to be completely broken and feel guilty about things, because mistakes or poor choices or whatever, we make them all the time as human beings. And over the years, I've had a good relationship with Chris, the driver. In fact, I just talked to him yesterday. He's thriving at his company, and I just tell him how proud I am of him. And I told him, I said, there's no winners in something what we went through. I said, you're a loser, I'm a loser, the company was a loser.
Only
there's
Hannah.
No winners.
Hannah's the winner because she's in heaven.
Yeah, my daughter's in heaven with the Lord. And Ron Middlestad and Daryl Chambliss at Waste Connections. Ron's been amazing. He's blessed our family so much. Yeah,
the 10-year anniversary of Hannah's death, they gave Caleb and Josiah money for college.
And they just, out of the goodness of their hearts, and they're Christian people, they're Christian businesses. And I mean, we were so shocked that 10 years after our daughter had passed away that they were like looking us up. And I didn't understand, but they were just, there's some very wonderful people at Waste Connections.
And they took care of their driver too.
Yeah, they took care of their driver. They didn't just write him off as a number, which is amazing. And it's because they're Christian men who are running Waste Connections.
Well, we decided to go to Grief Share. It was being offered at our church. And the lady and man who run it are Shirley and Jim Mozina. And Shirley's the one who's an author who, when she heard her story, she wanted to write an article. And then when they invited us over and actually heard the full story, they're like, this is more like a book. And so that's how.
Well, they had first asked me, and I'm like, no. I said, I've had people wanting to write a book for a long time, and I've always said no. And I look back and I just realized that we weren't ready to write a book. And when the time finally came, it's like, I finally said, okay, you can write a book.
So that's it. That's our story.
Gary and Mary went through intense grief. They've written about it, hoping to help others who have lost a child. The book is called Remembering Hannah, A Journey Through Loss with Hope. Both Gary and Mary suffered through losing a child, but in our next story, Adam didn't know how the next call would cause him to suffer for years.
My name's Adam Myers. I was born and raised in the city of Racine. I was at the police department working on a retail theft report. I was dispatched to Walmart. And when I was dispatched to Walmart, initially, it wasn't a very emergent call. It basically was a 911 hang-up call. And then our dispatch center contacted the person who initially called and kept them on the line and asked them what was going on. And they said that they were at Walmart with one of their clients, Melissa did struggle with mental health challenges. She was a patient at a state mental health facility. But it's my understanding she was out on a good behavior pass. They had gone to a fast food restaurant, and then they went over to Walmart and did some shopping. And when it was time to go, she didn't want to leave. And so the chaperone contacted 911 and wanted the police to assist with escorting her from the store. And that's not a big deal. We do that all the time. We do that at retail stores, at restaurants, at people's homes, you name it. So it wasn't very emergent. And I walked out the back of the police department. I jumped in my squad car and I started driving to Walmart, which was about 1.5 miles away. As I was driving towards Walmart, the call became more and more emergent. Dispatch advised me that Melissa was in the sporting goods section and she had removed a knife from the packaging. But they said that she was in possession of the knife and she's being threatening with it, threatening customers and walking towards the front of the store. So when I heard that, I turned on my emergency lights and sirens and I started stepping it up at a higher rate of speed. And when I got to Walmart, I pulled into the parking lot and it was busy. It was 5:15 on a Friday. And nobody would get out of the way. Everybody's kind of just looking at the police car coming in the parking lot. And I'm thinking, will you please move? There's something going on in the store. But so I exited my squad car and I drew my weapon right away because I didn't know where she was. She could have been right inside the door. And when I entered Walmart, there was a man and a woman there. And I asked them, where is she? And they pointed down towards the health and beauty aisle in the lawn and garden section. It was one of the main aisles, one of the main intersections. So I ran down there and I made contact with her, and initially her back was facing me. And I identified myself and gave her some verbal commands, and when she turned and faced me, I saw the hatchet. I realized that's not a knife, that's a hatchet. And she began to walk towards me. And I had my gun pointed at her, and I remember I just couldn't believe she wasn't listening to me. I gave her multiple verbal commands to stop, to drop the hatchet. She kept coming after me. And then I decided to shoot, and I shot her twice. And I remember the shots being so loud. They were just so echoey. There were hundreds of people in the store. And once she fell to the ground, I remember looking at the other customers and saying, please check yourself and please check each other. I wanted to make sure that my bullets only hit her and nobody else. And then I looked at an employee at Walmart and I said, please get on the intercom and ask if there's a doctor or a nurse so that they could come over here and help until the ambulance arrives. And there actually was a nurse in the light bulb aisle, and she said, I'm a nurse, and she came over and assisted. Everything seems surreal. I never thought that morning I would wake up and I'd be shooting somebody inside Walmart. And yeah, it's just when I pulled the trigger, that changed everything. That changed my life. It changed her life. It took her life, her family, her friends, even people on the other side of the store that may have heard the gunshots. Everybody has a story now, and it's not something I take lightly. The day after my shooting, I found out that the person I shot died. And after I had a meeting with the chief, the first thing I did was I went to one of the local churches and spoke to a pastor. I was born and raised Lutheran. I was baptized. I was confirmed. I had a good relationship with my pastor, and that was the first thing that I wanted to do, and I did that. And after that, I kind of just kicked God to the curb, kind of for the next 6-7 years when I was poorly coping because of my critical incident. I didn't feel like God was present, but even in tragedy, he was there. He was there the whole time. He's always been there. And on December 28th, I had a panic attack. I was at an active shooter training at an elementary school, and there was about 20 or 30 police officers there, and we were training active shooter. And we were watching a PowerPoint, and it started talking about the different active shooters that occurred in the United States and all across the world. And I started getting uncomfortable. I was seated comfortably like I am right now, and I started feeling really warm, a knot in my stomach. And about a minute later, I reached up to my forehead, and it was drenched in sweat. I was having a panic attack. And the first thing I thought was, I have to hide this and I have to fight through it because of that stigma associated with mental health. But everybody that was there knew me. Everybody knew that I was involved in a shooting and that I killed somebody in the line of duty. And if I truly believe, looking back now, if I would have raised my hand and said, I just can't do this training right now, I need to take a break, it would have been okay. Well, this was a long time coming. I mean, my shooting occurred in 2016, and this was December 2021. And throughout the years, I was poorly coping. I was poorly coping with abusing alcohol, with casual sex, with marijuana, abusing prescription drugs, self-harm, lying to my police chief to get out of work when I didn't need to because he supported me 100%. I could have just said, I can't be here, and he would have sent me home because he's done that before. And it was just cumulative. It just kept stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. And, you know, I went to work on New Year's Eve 2021, and I sat in my squad car and I started setting up all my gear. And I thought to myself, you know what? Forget it. I'm done. I ain't doing this anymore. And I reached out to a sergeant and I said, I need you to come with me to the chief's office because I'm quitting. I'm done. And he's like, hold up, you're not going to quit. I'll go with you. And we sat down with the chief, and they were both very supportive, and the chief sent me home. About 2 weeks later, I told the chief, hey, I'm ready to come back to work. And he said, that's great. But in order for you to come back to work, you have to have a fitness for duty test, a psychological evaluation. So I scheduled the appointment. And I remember the morning driving to that appointment, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to lie. I'm going to beat these tests. I don't need a test. I'm okay. I'm fine. I've been working. I don't need to do this. But when I got to the clinic and I was sitting in the waiting room, I thought to myself, you know what, Adam, you have to be honest. The only way you're going to get the right kind of help and get better is if you're honest. You can't lie. And I chose not to lie. I chose to be honest. And the testing was about 7 hours long. And once the testing was completed, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, PTSD, acute stress with dissociative features, and I was unfit for duty. I couldn't go to work. And I remember reading the results, this packet of results of my fitness for duty test, and I started crying. I was reading through it and I started crying because inside that packet were answers to all the things that I had been doing over the years and why. And I saw that as, this is wonderful. This is great. Now, what do I got to do to get better? What do I have to do? So what I did was I went to the police department and requested a 90-day leave of absence, and it was approved. And I started going to therapy 2-3 times a week. And it was great. I felt like I was getting better. I didn't miss any appointments. I was going to different kinds of therapies, talk therapy, EMDR, just all kinds of different stuff. And I could feel that I was getting better. And so my 90-day leave of absence was about to expire. And my chief called me in and we had a meeting. And he told me that the police department wasn't going to extend my leave of absence, that I could either resign or they would terminate me. And I was shocked. I had been there for 14 years. I had never been disciplined. I had never been suspended. I received awards, medals. I was promoted to the police department's very first detective a year after my shooting. So I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. This was work related, and now I have a decision to either resign or be fired. And I thought it over, and I said, I'm not quitting. And I was terminated. They terminated me. And I just remember leaving the police department that day, just feeling abandoned. And part of me even felt abandoned by God. Like, why would you put me through all of this? Why would you make me experience all this trauma and all these struggles? And not only that, the police department just, I feel, completely abandoned me. And the officers I worked with, they ghosted me. Nobody communicated with me. To this day, it's been almost 4 years since I was terminated, and still nobody communicates with me. And that hurts because I love these guys and gals. We went on some pretty dangerous calls together, and we knew each other pretty well. And I went home that day, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I love being a cop. All my life, that's all I wanted to do, but I didn't know what the next step was going to be. And my sister Amy reached out to me, and she asked, Adam, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I have no idea. And she said, why don't you move down here by mom and dad? And down here means 3.5, 4 hours away. And I told her, Amy, I hardly have any money. And she said, all you have to do is get down here and we'll take care of the rest. And I chose to do that. And mind you, I hadn't been seeing a therapist or on medication at that time. And I moved in with my sister, and she saw that her big brother was struggling. And I knew I was too. Not as bad as I was before, but I knew I needed help. And I just wasn't going to take that first step to find help or get help. But what she was doing is behind my back, and I'm blessed. I'm not upset at all. She was looking for a therapist for me. And I still remember the day Amy called me into her office, and she goes, hey, Ad, I want to tell you something. I don't want you to be upset with me, but I've been looking for a therapist for you, and I found one. And I remember giving her a hug and telling her, I'm not mad at you. This is great. And to this day, I still see that same therapist. So I got back into therapy. I got back on medication. I'm doing well. And a year after being terminated, I was hired as a police officer again in a community near where I moved to. And that is only by the grace of God. That is only because as a first responder, instead of putting everybody else first, I finally said, hey, I need some help. I need the right kind of help. In order for me to continue or even try to be a cop again, I got to take care of myself. And I was able to do that. And now I'm currently a captain at a police department.
Adam was restored to his position on a different police force. But in our next story, Gary lost something that can't be restored to him this side of heaven.
It was mid-December, late December. One thing led to another, and I just kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And that landed me in the hospital on New Year's Eve. And eventually I was airlifted from one hospital to another, and I fell into septic shock. I was in a coma for 10 days. And through that, it was just fighting for my life on a whole bunch of different machines. People have looked forward to talking to me when all this was said and done about when I was in the coma as to what I saw. What I do remember is having nightmares. I was having these very vicious, vivid nightmares. And I think it was a side effect to the medication that I was on. But the nightmares were all the same. And I remember two of them specifically. And in both of them, they consisted around me being trapped inside of something. Watching life happen, watching life go on through a mirror, a glass window, essentially, screaming at the top of my lungs for people to see me or find me. And they never could. And I remember so specifically that I tried to kill myself in my nightmare just to get out of it because I didn't want to be in that. Those nightmares were just awful, of being stuck somewhere and screaming for help and screaming for somebody to get me, and I couldn't get out of it. Hours and hours. So I remember waking up from the coma, and I have memories of being in the ICU room. It was this very tiny, cold room, no windows, because I was still on a ton of medicine. I started hallucinating, seeing things and hearing things that just weren't there. And so much so, I was so convinced that one moment that I saw my dog. My dog was in the hospital. My dog was sitting in the chair next to me. I'm like, he's right here, hanging out with me. Come to find out, but that very night, Bones, our dog, passed away. I believe that he came to say goodbye to me. All that to say, I couldn't talk for the longest time. I had to mouth all of my words and hope that people understood me. But I was alive. I didn't know, I wasn't a part of all the initial conversations being in the coma that I might lose my hands and feet. At that time, my extremities were so necrotic that had they done the amputations right then, which the vascular surgeons wanted to do just to be done with it, had they done them right then, my upper extremity amputations would have both been above my elbows and my lower extremities would have both been above my knees. People with above the knee amputations have a very difficult time finding their balance. There would have been a very good chance that I would have never been able to attempt to walk. I just had such a peace about it. It just made sense to me that that was going to happen. There's a verse in Job that said, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And I truly believed at that moment that it was just taking away time in my life. And it was time for Christ to take that from me. So whatever, that verse ends with, blessed be the name of the Lord. And okay. This conversation could have very easily gone the route of, hey, we don't think we're going to be able to save one of your hands. We're going to have to amputate a hand. God could have easily taken one thing from me, but he didn't. He took it all. He took everything. And I know in my heart, and I knew it in that conversation, that God would not do something so big and so drastic in my life if he didn't have something for me at the end of it.
I don't wish pain or suffering on myself or anyone else. It's awful. But if I live long enough, I know I'll experience it. In fact, that's one of God's promises to me. In the world, you will have tribulation. Jesus makes that clear in John 16:33. But the good news is the next part. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Both on this side of heaven and more fully on the other side of heaven, our tragedies and our mourning will be turned into joy and dancing. And that makes me say, wow, God. And when I say wow, God, I mean the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who makes my heart say,
Wow, God.
wow, God.
Wow, God.
My wow God story.
I wanted to share a wow God moment.
That's my wow God story. Praise God.
And I'm so thankful to God for this wow God moment.
So, thank you, God.